Hey guys,
Hi.
thanks for taking the time today. I wanted to start off by asking one of the things I really like about the documentary is it shows how Sparks forges their own path, has, kind of, they're always their own direction. But I was curious, what was your relationship like with the record labels and companies that may not have always been thrilled that you weren't chasing trends?
Well, we were really fortunate. I think the one of the few advantages of being at this stage of our career was that when we started, the record companies were little bit more enlightened, and that they felt that even if we weren't selling an enormous amount of records, that that kind of what we were giving to the label as a balance to other artists was kind of enriching what the label represented. That we had the first two albums out in the States that with Todd Rundgren and Bearsville, where they didn't sell an enormous amount, but Warner Brothers, who kind of owned, was a part of Bearsville, they really appreciated what we could bring to the label, even if it wasn't selling a lot of records. And then later on, we were lucky enough to be involved with Island Records in the 70s, where Chris Blackwell was really an enlightened kind of person and a visionary. So we're fortunate just that the things that have happened for us didn't need to happen within 2 or 3 days, or else you're gone. That there were people that would stick with what we were doing, knowing that in time that there would be kind of acceptance of it. And I don't think that exists now, and I feel bad for bands now that are in that position where it's kind of do or die within a very short amount of time.
So many artists show up in this film and they talk about how much Sparks meant to them and how they were inspired by Sparks and pulled from Sparks. For Sparks, I'm curious, who are your inspirations? Who are the artists that you admire?
Well, early on, we were huge Anglophiles, and so when we were growing up, and it's talked about to a large extent in the documentary, we turned to the UK, and sitting here in LA, kind of going against the grain of the Laurel Canyon kind of vibe that was also prevalent here at that time. But we always loved the English bands that early on, like the early Who, the early Kinks, and the Move, and obviously the Beatles and the Stones. Yes, we felt there was kind of a certain bigger than life quality is how we perceived them. That they looked different than us. They acted different on stage. There was more of a show that they were putting on at that point. And the lyrics to some of those bands you mentioned were kind of really special and unique and seemed a bit exotic to us too, being from LA and hearing songs about Waterloo Sunset and what's Waterloo and all of that, Village Greens and tattoos, the Who's singing of tattoos, and like a small kind of subject matter, but made into kind of a bigger topic because it's being addressed in a song. So all those things kind of intrigued us. And so we always kind of gravitated more to the UK during our more formative years of music.
Edgar, how did you prepare for directing your first documentary? Is it a different tool set than directing a narrative feature?
Yeah, I guess the obvious difference is like you're making a movie, you're starting a story from scratch, and like nobody knows what the story is, so you kind of like have the chance to sort of develop it as you go along. But with this is like you're taking like sort of an existing story and figuring out how to make it into a film. And so, I mean, if anything, it was kind of just there's like an embarrassment of riches. And I think also because part of my pitch to Ron and Russell was that I wanted to tell the whole story. I didn't want to be like one of these documentaries that you get. Well, because Sparks are an unusual case because they're a band that are sort of bringing out music regularly, like every 2 or 3 years. And most other bands that started at the same time have sort of either become like their own tribute act or are not releasing music, or even when they do it, sort of they release, it always feels like kind of pleasing the audience or writing pop songs is beneath them. So what Sparks were doing to me was just incredible. And I felt like it would be my thesis was basically to say, like, the 70s is not the golden period. The golden period is like 50 years long. Like we're still in the golden period of Sparks. So that was basically my thesis. And so in terms of telling the story, it was about like looking at the archive, obviously, and finding archive for things that we knew existed, but like we had to kind of like get hold of them. And then it was really, I thought I would create an oral history, because obviously incredible to interview Ron and Russell. And then, but also to bring in how they have touched other people's lives, is to talk to fans, famous and non-famous, and have like that equilibrium. So there's an equivalence between John Taylor from Duran Duran and like Julia Marcus, who stage invaded age 12, and sort of what anybody has to say about Sparks, whatever like experience level or whatever knowledge, is valid. And so that to me was important, because it was something to sort of show the massive cultural footprint of Sparks. Then it needed to be a proper oral history. And in that sense, I ended up interviewing 80 people. And that was amazing, because it just felt to me that the influence is so big that, just having 3 or 4 interviewees didn't seem quite right. And also, because you could show, it wasn't just like it was one period that was influential. It's like 5 periods. And you can sort of see, like the sort of the fans that come into the story throughout. I wasn't there at the start, but I came in at a certain point and never let go. And other people did the same.
Do you feel that this is a documentary you'll have to keep updating? I mean, we have Annette coming out later this year, and I'm super excited for that. Or is this sort of, do you feel like there's a good endpoint for this story?
This is the first 50 years, and then there's going to be a part 2 and 3. So eventually it's going to cover 150 years of Sparks. It's going to be like my Michael Apted 7 Up.
We've signed on as part of the contract too.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
it's a 3-picture deal, documentary deal.
In the third one, they go into space with Jeff Bezos.
So for someone looking to get into Sparks, this is a question for all 3 of you. Would you recommend starting with the documentary, or do you think it would be better to start with a particular album or a particular era?
Well, I have this theory, because I get asked this a lot, is what album should I start with? And the truth is, it's difficult to sum up Sparks in one album, because, okay, you could say Come Into My House, a classic album, but it's not the whole story. So I sort of sometimes got it down to like 5. I mean, ultimately, like there's more than one great best of. And in fact, there'll be a soundtrack album for this film, which is a pretty good like journey through the decades as you could want. But when I try and put it down to like 5 albums, and these can change because there's more than 5 great albums. Like Kimono My House, number 1, next to My Pants, then I'm jumping a lot already, but and Hippopotamus. That at least starts to get the sense of the shape, but obviously there's even more than that. So it is like, that's why I decided to sort of document the entire discography. Is I'd heard from people who even were aware of Sparks, that they said, oh, I want to get into Sparks, but I'm sort of daunted by their discography. So it was great to do a documentary where you could do an overview of the entire career. And also it was important to do every album, because a lot of music documentaries they'll gloss over like a flop, like the Bee Gees documentary, which was great. I really loved it. But my only criticism was like, oh, I wanted to hear about the Sgt. Pepper film. And obviously that bit gets skipped over, like skip over those 2 years. But but with this, it was like, in a weird way, the albums that maybe didn't sell well at the time, they go on to be influential in their own way. So eventually, like, no album is more or less important than another one.
Thank you guys so much. I thought the documentary was fantastic, and just congratulations on everything.
Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you.
Yes.